this computer. Thank you. All right. The Torah's major concern now turns towards the story of Israel, the Jewish people. We left off last week with the lineage coming down from the time of Noah down to Abraham Avinu, to Abraham our father. His first command, God says, Lech lecha mi'artzecha, get out, leave where you were born, leave your past. You're going to start something new. And he's already not a youngster. So the Torah says he's 75 years of age. Sarah's equally old. That plays into the storyline later on. So what we want to understand is that this is a new beginning. But we don't know anything comes before this. It's all a blank. And I made reference before to Midrash, and we'll talk about Midrash in some detail later on, when we get to that. But the rabbis struggled to try and fill in the blanks, the gaps. And there are numerous stories. And when I was a kid, a youngster, very popular Hebrew text, which was all these biblical stories and a lot of midrashic stories, and some people grow up not realizing that these stories are not in the Bible. The most famous of them being that Terach, Abraham's father, was a maker of idols. And one day he had to go out somewhere, so he left Avram, or Avram as he was known then, in charge of the store. And Avram had already been convinced that there must be one God. I'll come back to that in a moment. And so while his father was gone, he takes a hammer and smashes all the idols in the shop, and puts the hammer in the hands of one big idol that was still left. So when Terach comes back and he sees everything smashed up, and he says, "What happened?" Avram says, "The big idol took a hammer and smashed up all the little idols." He says, "No, that can't be. You can't do anything." And so how can you believe in this God? Now, the Bible treats all idolatry as mostly being fetishes. The idols are assumed to be of no value in and of themselves. It's hard to say. Sometimes are the idols just images that are supposedly inhabited by the deity? Do the idols have holiness in them of themselves? How are we to treat them? The psalmist says, it talks about making the idols. People make them. They have hands, but they cannot feel. They have eyes, they can't see. They have a mouth, they cannot talk. Ears, they can't hear. So it reduces idolatry to these images. The pagan religions were much more complex than that. But the biblical dealing with it puts it on its lowest form that it could be possible. As a matter of fact, sometimes idols are called Elilim. El is a way of God, means a god. And they're also called Gilulim, which is a play on the word for feces. Okay? They seem to have no efficacy. Now, when you look at modern historians, modern biblical historians, they assume that Judaism develops out of an idolatrous world, and they have all kinds of ways explaining how it comes into being. And that the God of Israel originally was just a local God, and then becomes more as time goes on, and they develop the vision of what God is supposed to be, and then we've got the one God that we worship now. I was even listening to a discussion not long ago, which claimed that even in the first few centuries of the Common Era, both Jews and the early Christians believed that the other gods existed. I don't buy that myself, but that's irrelevant. What we do need to understand is that Jewish tradition builds on this vision of one God, all-powerful, that is not one of the gods, but is the only God. We're going to talk about the Shema Yisrael. Listen, Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the God that we have the personal name of Yud Hey Vav Hey. Eloheinu is our God. Then Hashem, again, the same name of God, Echad. Now, the word Echad doesn't have just one meaning. It means one, can mean only, can mean solely, uniquely, many shades of meaning. So that when we say the Shema, we're saying that God is not only one versus many, one meaning not divisible, one meaning unique, unlike anything else in existence, and that we are commanded to worship and draw close to only that entity that we define by the name Yud Hey Vav Hey. Famously, the Midrash again says towards the end of Jacob's life, which we'll read in a few weeks, he wants to, the Midrash says he wants to tell his children what's going to happen in the future. And God takes away from him that ability. And he's worried. Why did God take away his capacity to prophesize of the future? Maybe his children are turning away from the one God. Now, remember, Jacob has two names. He's originally named Yaakov, Jacob. Later on, he's given the name Yisrael, Israel. And so B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, that's us. So Jacob has his sons around and says, have any of you gone away from the one God? And so his sons say, Shema, listen, Yisrael, Israel, our father. Hashem Elokeinu. No, Hashem is our God. Hashem Echad, only him. So that's what he said. The original Shema comes from that. And that's a core prayer of Judaism. That's, as they say, we'll speak about it tonight and next week as well. So Abraham somehow latches on, according to our tradition, to the idea that there's just one universal deity. And the one story gives it, he says, one day he says, I don't buy this, all these different gods. There must be one God that's most powerful. And he's in a bright sunshine day. Okay. A bright sunshiny day. Sun is beating down. If you've ever been in the Middle East at noontime in summer or during Khamsin, that can be a pretty powerful force up there. That must be the one God. Worship the sun. And so then the sun sets and up pops the moon. He says, the moon must be more powerful than the sun. And then the wind comes and blows the clouds in front of the moon. So the wind is the one God. And then the sun rises in the morning and then we're back to the beginning. And you understand that there's one entity, one force that's behind all of this, all of nature. Now, in general, we tend to, the ancients deified the various aspects of nature. There's a sun god, there's a god of the storm, there's a god of the ocean, all kinds of things that are personified in the gods. And my pet theory is one of the reasons we refer to the one God using the plural term Elohim, which is a plural word, theoretically means gods, because everything that is worshipped as gods is
Benjamín, tienes que
contained in the one
apurarte.
God. Somebody out there is listening on right now. You are mute your microphone because I keep hearing you talking to your kids. And it wasn't English and it wasn't Hebrew. It's okay, but all right. There's all kinds of attempts to prove
No sigues a la pipi en el baño de papá, ¿ok?
that this is how Abraham came to the belief in the one God and monotheism. You can pick whichever one you
En el
like.
baño hace pipí.
So he's God's appears to him, calls out to him, tells him to go, moves to Canaan, and as soon as he's
Hace pipí,
there,
¿ok?
he's challenged right away.
Hace pipí acá.
Somebody, all right. We'll just have to deal with it. Where was I? Okay, so he's told he has to go down to Egypt because there's a famine, and this happens every once in a while. He goes down to Egypt, and he notices how beautiful his wife Sarah is. I don't know what he's been doing, looking at the last 75 years. He doesn't know she's beautiful, but he sees she's beautiful. He's worried, and so he says, "Tell everybody that you're my sister." So Pharaoh takes her to his court, and then God intervenes and gives Paro all kinds of problems, Surus, and he says he took Abraham's wife, sent him back, etc. Well, it's interesting. You have very early the hero of the Bible, and there are two visions of how to judge Abraham's his behavior. One school of thought notes that they were related. The Bible itself doesn't say that, but the tradition, the Midrash, says that he was actually her uncle, and uncles married nieces in those days. So they were kindred. So he wasn't really lying. And he said it because, if a woman is married and another guy wants that woman, well, he's got to get rid of the husband. But if that woman has a brother, well, you kind of make good friends with the brother. We go to the bar together and drinks and all that else, whatever. So that would be to protect Abraham. And so he didn't really do anything bad. And one of the other rabbis says, no. One of the traditional commentaries says, no, he lacked faith. He should have trusted in God. And so one of the things, there are two different approaches in looking at the biblical heroes. And I must admit that the Talmud and many traditional commentaries tend to say they're all perfect, or they have minor defects, but they're really great people. We see something that looks wrong, we have to find some way of explaining it. I prefer a different approach, which is to say, yes, they were great men and women. They were people. People make mistakes. Flesh and blood make mistakes. And if they can surpass those mistakes that they made and still be in those flaws in their own character and still become important, good people, well, that's a paradigm I can follow. I can't be like somebody who's perfect. I know that I can't be perfect. Can I try and be better than I am? Can I try to find the best way of living my life? Yes. So that's worthy of following. And my own personal view is that that's the Bible's perspective, that we are not angels. We are human beings. Our heroes are human beings. They have feet of clay. And yet they do wonderful things, and they do some not so wonderful things. And that serves as a way of giving us guidance on how we should live our lives. There's also another kind of a theme that seems to appear, and I'll leave it to you to decide the meaning of it. Right after they leave Egypt. Avram had taken with him his nephew Lot. And it describes how Lot has got lots of cattle, and so does Abraham. And it's just there are problems between their sheep herders and their cow hands, their cowboys or girls or whatever. And they can't really stay together. So Abraham says, let's divide up. You go one way, I'll go the other. You take the choice. And so Lot chooses to go to the area around Sodom, Sodom and Gomorrah. Apparently being enticed by what he sees there. And then later on, he ends up living in the city. And Abraham goes the other direction. And then again, a little later, we have a story about a reflection of ancient wars. There are 4 kings against 5 kings from the east and the west, and they battle. But as part of this battle, Lot is taken captive. So Abraham chases after with his retainers, and he wins the battle and saves the day. So there's a bit of a war hero there, but still, he's the one thing he doesn't have. The most important thing to him is to have a child, to have somebody's going to come after him, to inherit the land that God has promised him. And so we're told how he ends. Sarah eventually gives him Hagar to marry, and she has a child. There's all kinds of conflicts with them, and the issues that arise there. And there's a famous episode also in this week's portion, which is called Brit Ben Abtarim, the covenant of the pieces. And Avram has a dream, and I think the whole story is a dream. I think Maimonides says the same thing. Or I say the same thing as Maimonides. Shouldn't think he's saying what I said. It all takes place in a dream, and he takes these animals and he takes and slaughters them, and one half on this side, one half on this side, and this whole ceremony in which God appears in a certain way in a pillar of fire, cloud goes between the pieces, promising Abraham that he will eventually inherit the land, and his children will go down as slaves to, it doesn't say to Egypt, but go down, be slaves in a land unknown to them, and then come back up. And finally, at the end of the Torah portion, we're told that Abraham is commanded to circumcise himself, his household. Anyone who's going to be born in the future, male, has to be circumcised. Brit Milah, the covenant of the circumcision. And so Yishmael, who's 13 years of age, is circumcised at that time. That's why there's a tradition amongst some Muslim communities to circumcise at a much later age. Abraham is way beyond that. And that allows us to set the stage for the future birth of Isaac, which we don't read about till next week. Okay? Excuse me. All righty. So as I promised you last time, we are going to continue with our Hebrew. Do you have the text with you? You didn't last time, Conrad, or you already know the Hebrew. You got it up there. Okay. Does everybody have a copy of the text that they need?
No.
Yeah, I sent it out to everybody.
Was it just before copy? I just got back from the.
Oh, okay. Well, here's I have a few extra copies. What anybody else need? Here's one more. I sent it out to everybody to be. You don't have it now.
I have the digital one.
You have the digital.
I
Okay.
printed out what you
You
sent.
printed out. Okay. All right. Very good. I got the one with the coffee spill that you got to look at. Okay. We had finished page 13 last week. All right. Everybody okay?
Yes.
Well,
Is there an extra copy of the book?
can you share with, please? The 3 you have to share. Is that it?
So you got the copies done.
Yeah, that's what we love the copies.
That's
Good.
Still read it.
It's all good. Yeah.
Uh,
13.
it's
We're on
I
14 now, right?
we
Oh,
went
13.
through 13. Last week we ended with 13, which was a review of all of the things that we had done. I'm working on creating a list, probably for next time, of words that we find in the Siddur that you can read from the words you've learned so far. Some appear, some don't. Okay. And also on my own time, I'm doing a review for myself of biblical grammar. Believe me, you would not want to do that at all. All right. Pretonic, pre-protonic, oh, there are kinds of fancy words I use. Okay. So we're still working on the language of a bracha, of a blessing. All right. How does a blessing begin? What are the first three words of a blessing? Oh, no. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai. So we have now reached the point where we are going to work on the word Eloheinu, our God. Eloheinu, our God. So at the top of page 14, we're introduced to a new vowel sign. It's called in Hebrew the segol. All right, 3 dots. Okay, and that is normally pronounced as as an etrog. Actually, it's just shortening of a vowel, but we won't get into the nitty-gritty of that. But it is an important vowel that appears many places. And it actually, on the top of the page, it appears in 2 different forms. One under the Aleph of Eloheinu, which we'll get to later, and then under the word for Melech, which is king. All right? That's called a segol. The other is going to chatav segol, a half segol. All right. So it's As we remember, as we said last week, you always have to have a consonant followed by a vowel. If the vowel is long, then that makes a syllable. If the vowel is short, then you need another consonant to connect with it to finish the syllable. Right? We're not going to worry a whole lot about that aspect of it, but you should be aware of it. So everybody can say that's not a difficult sound to make. Does anybody have any as problems? Okay. Okay, so line number 1. Let us read. We have be, re, ye, he, te, che. All right? All right, the chaf is at the top of the back of your throat rather than at the bottom of the back of your throat, if you really care. All right, line number 2. We have reb, bet, erech, tet, becha. Now, erech is illustrative, or illustrative, it's both, I guess. When you have a word, usually just a 3-letter word that has the 2 segols, the accent is not going to be on the last syllable, but on the next to last syllable. Normally, 75% of the time, give or take, a Hebrew word is accented on the last syllable. Baruch atah Eloheinu. Okay? The accent comes on the last syllable of the word. That's when you read it correctly. All right? Sometimes when you have certain reasons, the accent shifts. One of those is when you have a word that is composed of the 2 vowels, the 2 segols, the accent shifts to the next to last syllable. Melech, not melech, but melech. Dever, not dever. Gezer. Oh, yeah. There goes. Well, rega, but that's not a seglet. Okay, so we will see the word melech. The accent is not on the last syllable, but on the first syllable. There's only 2 there, right? Melech. All right. So whenever you see 2 segols together, that's going to tell you if it's a real word, the accent is going to shift one over. Now, those of you who go to a synagogue where they mostly use the Ashkenazi pronunciation, often the accent is shifted. That's really not correct Hebrew, but that came Eastern European Hebrew often was affected that way. That's why you hear Shabbos, not Shabbos. In Sephardi Hebrew, you'll have Shabbat. It's easier to, I don't know, maybe it's easier to accent it that way. But you go to, especially a lot of Orthodox synagogues, you'll say, you hear Shabbos, Shabbos. Or in Yiddish, a good Shabbos. Or a Git Shabbos, depending upon where you come in Europe. If you go to Shul or Shiel. Normally, by the grammatical rules of Hebrew, the accent will be most of the time on the last syllable, and then with segolets, when you have two segols, it shifts to the next last syllable. Okay. All right. So let's look at line number 3. We have rechet, techet, teret, beret. Okay. So now we're going to start getting into a little more complex sound together. Okay. Line number 4. Harechet, arbe, arba, harbe. Okay. Line number 5. Yarbe, arche, arechet, tabachet. Okay. Line number 6. Harechet, baruchu, berech, barcha. Right? Just well, now a point at the bottom of the page. We have sometimes it's written with the triangular dots, the 3 dots, with what looks like a shva next to it, and that's called for those who want to remember, it's a chatav segel, and that is it's used because of certain rules of grammar. Where really it should be a shva, but you can't put the shva there, so we have put this sego with the shva next to it to tell us that that's how we're going to have to read it. All right, so that's why Eloheinu. All right, see, if it were let's see, Eloheinu. What's a good example? Where's an example of it that I can think of? I'm running a blank on it, trying to think of a real word that works with it. But in any case, it is really like a shortened, but we don't pronounce it any differently. Okay, so that's the add the segel. Let's turn now to the next page. We're getting a new letter in the alphabet, the lamed. Lamed has the same sound as the letter L. And the name lamed tells you that. Okay, and so lamed, lambda in Greek, you see the relationship that we've talked about before. So it's the second letter in Eloheinu, our God. And so it takes the L sound, and then whatever vowel sound it's associated with. So line number 1, we have le, la, la, le, lu, eh. All right, line number 2, tal, tul, lucha, lul, labat. Okay, 3, talu, babul, leraba, arbel, el. 4, lechet, berel, turat, baruchu. Okay, line number 5, halechet, halacha, halach, halacha, lelechet, lelechet. All right, there's 2 segos there. That's the way you know the next line. Okay. Line number 6, bulach, behar, tarbut, baruch, ata. Line 7, talech, Balechet, telchu, bilachat, le'altar. All right. Still with me? All right, let's turn over to the next page. Now we're going to be introduced to the O vowel. Now the O vowel takes two forms. It's either the line with the dot on top of it, which is the letter Vav, but right now we're treating it purely as a vowel sound. Okay? Or it'll be a dot at the top of a letter. Normally, it will be on the left side of the letter that it's associated with, top left. All right, everybody follow that? Understand that? So it is O. So line number 1, we have bo, o, to, ho, hu, oo. Line number 2, bo, o, lo, to, ho, lo, lu. Line number 3, roll, tor, bore, bow, root. Line 4, or, bechor, borat, Torah. Anybody know what that last word is?
Torah.
The Torah. Yeah, see, that's the accent shift. Torah. We say in English, we often say Torah, but it's really Torah. But you won't. Nobody take away points from you if you say Torah. Now, in our class, you better not say Torah, but because that's a different accent. All right, the Torah. All right, line number 5. To wrote, o wrote, Yubal, Bubot, Elul. Anybody know what the name of the month before Tishrei is?
Hello.
Elul. All right, line number 6. Your boat, Horaot, Yaltut, Orlot, Ella. Line number 7. Bechorot, Lot, Bul, Roeh. And line number 8, Aroch, Arucha, La'aroch, Erbul, Berech. All right, we'll do one more page. Okay, the A vowel. Once again, we have it with or without another letter associated with it. I saw a question that was asked, how come Hebrew doesn't have vowels? Ancient Hebrew, there were no vowels. It says, how can you read it without vowels? It's not true. It wasn't there weren't vowels. It was that there was no way, they didn't have a way of symbolizing the vowels. The vowels are always there. How can you read consonant without a vowel? But it was only created later on. And then some letters became vowel indicators. So the O with a dot on top was sometimes added to words to tell you that there's an O sound there, even before the vowel system was created that we have. And similarly, the letter Yud following the A sound, sometimes Yud was added to tell you that the A vowel is being associated with that consonant. But if it's, all right, so on the right-hand side of the page, where it says Tzeireh, it's a line and the 2 dots under the line, that will be the way it looks directly under a word by itself, or under a letter, excuse me, by itself. The second example, with the 2 dots followed by the letter Yud, that's technically the long vowel form of it. And so you would have the consonant over the A again. So the difference in sound between those two. The bay, just by the bet, or well, you know, bay with the yud after it, as is on the end of the second line. Okay. So let's practice this one last page. Okay, so line number 1, we have bay, a, hey, te, yay. Line 2, ray, hey, hey, lay, bay. Line number 4, tate, bait, beito, leilot, lecha. Line number 4, leah, borer, yoel, techela. 5, yarbe, rachel, haloch, telech, lech. Line 6, ohel, beohel, leohel, ohelet. 7, beita, baita, below, orech, arecha. All right. By the way, if you, the last word in line number 5, lech, and the last word on line number 3, lecha, is the name of this week's Torah portion. Lech lecha. Right? Lech lecha. Abraham, God tells Abram, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'aretz moletecha le'aretz asher arecha. Okay. Homework, practice. Every night, practice. At least a good half hour. If it's bad, a good hour. There's only one way to learn how to read Hebrew, and that is to do it. I can't stress that hard enough. Hebrew's not so terrible. The problem with Hebrew is you're learning a different alphabet. The language itself, if we were doing language studies, would be a lot easier, perhaps, if it were written with the Latin alphabet, but we don't do that. We use the Hebrew alphabet. Okay. Besides which is they make these fancy signs for the alphabet when they transliterate for the biblical, an S with a curve on top of it, or a B with a straight line underneath it, making the ba, the v, the kaf, and the chaf, the kuf, and okay, it's an arshka. All right, tefillah, prayer. We know when we look at the Bible, the Torah especially, but throughout the Bible, the standard way of worship of the ancient world was through sacrifices. That was found everywhere. It was not unique to Judaism or to any other of the religions, and most all of them had some sense of sacrifice. Now, we know that sacrificial system starts with the concept that somehow the gods are energized, fed, in some way they get something out of the sacrifice. The Babylonian creation stories, I told you about Enuma Elish the other day, where the gods come around the smoke of the sacrifice of Ushnapishtim, the hero of their flood story, to get that odor, that aroma, like flies hanging above the sacrifice. Now, we believe that in Judaism, this becomes a more refined concept. And as Nachmanides, the Ramban says, they have power in them, in and of themselves, as a ritual, that it also is a statement that if I did something wrong, it should have been me being punished. So I sacrifice something else to atone for my actions. But I really should be the one on the fire. So it becomes symbolic of moving away from whatever transgression, whatever kind of thing that I was doing to make me guilty and needing to make some kind of repair. So all of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, along with their wives, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. I was a little embarrassed one time at one of the Batei Din. Someone was asked, who was the name of the three patriarchs? And the person was a little perplexed and didn't understand. So please remember, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob with Rachel and Leah. Or Bilhah and Zilpah get left out, the concubines. So they also, though, exchange words to a certain, they're not really prayers, although we have when Jacob, after his dream, sanctifies this matzeva, this stone, and says, worship God there, basically makes a deal with God. If you will bring me back and I will worship you at this place. So we see that as a kind of a prayer. We see prayer very clearly spelled out in the story of Hannah. You remember on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, the Haftarah is the story of Hannah. Hannah was one of two wives, and her rival wife was very fecund. She had lots of children, and poor Hannah didn't have any. And her husband says, "Don't worry about it. You know, more to me than a bunch of sons would be," but still, she feels bad about it. And so there's the scene is drawn that she goes to the tabernacle that was there where they had gone, and she prays to God, seeking a child. That's the first clear prayer that we find in the Torah. The rabbis, looking at this, use it as a paradigm of the way prayer should be offered. In the heart, it should be voiced, but not voiced so loud that anybody else can hear it necessarily. But see, I thought I had it right there. But in any case, they derive a lot of the rules of prayer from her prayer, from Hannah's prayer. We have hymns. The book of Psalms are basically prayers, not necessarily asking for anything, but describing the relationship to God. Right now, in a lot of synagogues, because of what's going on in Israel, there's a custom to recite extra psalms. So they're Shema Mima Akim Karati Chiya, a song of ascents. From out of the depths I cried out to the Lord, and He saved me. Okay, so usually the psalms are more saluting what God has done, although sometimes they are petitionary to a certain degree. Sometimes they're just descriptive. It's not clear from the Bible exactly, but certainly the rabbis understood that most of the psalms were created during the sacrificial service. When they would offer sacrifices, the Levites would sing some of these psalms. But prayer as a formal system did not exist until much later on in Jewish history. We find really, when we start to see the prayers as we know them, they are said by the Talmud to derive from the rabbis or the men in the Great Assembly, which is this institution that existed sometime between the time of Alexander the Great and the beginning of the Common Era. According to rabbinic tradition, Ezra the scribe, who brings back some of the people from Babylonian exile, he was a member of that Sanhedrin. Mordechai, not Sanhedrin, excuse me, Great Assembly. Mordechai of the Purim story was supposed to be a member of the Great Assembly, etc. And rabbinic tradition says the basic prayers were composed around that time. I don't know how far back that may be, but it's possible that some of the prayers that we have till today have very old history to them. But we really don't know them until around the time of the 2nd century of the Common Era, in the Mishnah and later in the Talmud, whether we get full indications of them. We know that some passage, like Shema, apparently very early was recited. The rabbis talk about in the temple, during the 2nd temple period, that the priests not only offered sacrifices in the temple, but they also offered prayers. And amongst the prayers they recited was the Shema and the 10 Commandments. Later on, the 10 Commandments dropped out of the regular liturgy. But the Shema remained the central core expression in the liturgy. At some stage, it became formalized. We know that the rabbis suggest that originally anybody could make their own prayer. And even later on, when we started to make a structure, because Judaism sees structure as a very important element in religious life, that structure gave you a format to follow, but you could compose your own wording. And that seems to have been what was going on for a while, but Maimonides, much later on, his explanation is that people had a hard time putting into words what they felt. They didn't have the vocabulary, they didn't have the confidence in their speech or what have you. And so eventually it was composed into a set liturgy that we have today. And that set liturgy has a certain format for the prayer. If you start off every blessing as an independent unit with the words Baruch Atah Adonai, usually Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu for the Amidah. All right, so Baruch Atah Hashem is the opening words for a prayer. That was standardized very early. And when you go through the Siddur, let's just look at Birchot Shachar. Unfortunately, I'm not sure we all have the same. Okay, first thing to do, you have to learn, is you go, every Siddur basically will have a table of contents. And if you look at the table of contents, that will help you into finding what we want to look at. So on the weekday, under the weekdays, you'll see it says morning blessings. Everybody got one? Got the table of contents? It says morning blessings. Mine says page 27. They may vary in the pagination a little bit, even though they're all in Koran. Okay.
27.
All right. So is it 27 for everybody?
This one is.
Okay. So on 27, we have what it says other morning blessings. You have? Don't have what?
I don't know.
Page 12,
12, that one? Okay. Page 12 there. All right. So we see here, there's a series of blessings. These are the morning blessings that we're supposed to recite every morning. Today, they're normally recited in the synagogue at the beginning of the synagogue service, but that's a Maser, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it has the same, that will have the same in it, actually. Go to the beginning of the morning, got it upside down. They originally were said as these things took place. Okay, so we'll look at the first one to give you, it starts off, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, right? So that's the standard opening. And each line, these separate this. You see there's stanzas here. Each one begins with the word Baruch. Baruch was off to the side. You can all read that now, can't you?
Yes.
Right? Right? Shake your heads, make the stones rattle in your heads. Okay. So, and you can all read the next word too, Atah.
Yes.
So you know what I'm talking about. Baruch Atah.
Mhm.
Let me have the marks. I'll find it for you.
It's 34, I think.
It could be. Oh yeah, this is his dear Moses' heavy book.
Yeah.
Tov L'chaim Tovim Malruchi. This is Rosh Hashanah evening.
It was one.
Yeah, my chances are I went past it.
So much.
Okay. By the way, for those of you who want, there are a number of free apps that have the prayer books on it. Some you pay a little bit, but there's some that you can get there. It's interesting today to see people praying on the weekdays in an Orthodox synagogue with the phone or a tablet. All right.
Rabbi,
So that's the opening. Each one of these begins, and then what it follows is a statement of request or a statement of praises. And this first one here, Asher Natan L'Sachli V'Na Lavchin Bein Yom Uvein Laila, using Koren's translation, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives the heart understanding to distinguish day from night. Now, there's a difference of opinion as to what the words Lasech Vi, who gives Lasech Vi, Bina, gives the Sech Vi understanding. And many think it's a rooster. Because how do you wake up in the morning in the old days? Cock-a-doodle-doo. So it may be a reference to the rooster being able to see the break of towards dawn. All right, so now these are a series, but they're each individual. So they all begin the same way, Baruch Atah. Now, when there is a set number of prayers that are integrated with each other, the first of those prayers will begin with Baruch Atah. It ends with a Baruch Atah, a short version Baruch Atah. But the next one in line does not begin with Baruch Atah. That's Matbeya Tefillah. So, for example, in Grace After Meals, only the first blessing in the Grace After Meals begins Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, and then it ends with Baruch Atah Hashem Azan et hakol. The next blessing begins Nodeh Lacha, we give thanks to you. Because it's a series of blessings that are interconnected. So when it's an individual standout blessing by itself, the formula will be Baruch Atah, and depends on the nature of the prayer and how it's going to end. Okay, so we see that very clearly spelled out here because each one of those are separate blessings. And as you go through them, you will see they talk about basic ideas. And I will hit. I'm going to skip a couple and come back to the problematic ones in a minute. So let's turn over. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth blessing. Bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives sight to the blind. Everybody got that? Okay. Then the next one is bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who clothes the naked. What's the first thing you do when you wake up? No, before that.
open your eyes.
Open your eyes. First thing we do is we open our eyes. So we thank God who gives sight to the blind. And in those days, mostly people slept naked. That's the bedclothes is the bedding. And then so they would, when they get dressed, but we know we're going to get dressed. So, but he clothes the naked. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who sets the captives free. right? When you start to get up, start moving, sit up in bed. Then who raises those bowed down? All right? So you're straightening yourself up, getting out of bed. And then bless you, Lord God, King who spreads the earth above the waters. When you put your feet on the floor and you're ready to stand up, you're happy to have that land there. Okay. Then who provided me with all I need. The rabbis say when you put your shoes on, shoes were a sign of luxury, sometimes a sign of wealth. Certainly without shoes, you were in dire straits, which is part of the reason why we don't wear shoes or leather shoes on Yom Kippur. So if you got everything, if you don't have shoes, you haven't got everything. If you got shoes, basically you got everything you have to have. All right. And then if so provided me with all I need, then it makes firm the steps of of humanity. Again, as I've pointed out I've pointed out before and will time and time again, often the masculine language is used. Most of the time, especially in prayers, it is just the common way of speech. So you can makes firm the steps of a human being. And in those who are very concerned about language, inclusive language, what have you, they would substitute for man, they'll say a human being, whatever, but it's the same thing. All right. Then when you put your belt on, girds you with strength. We put your hat on or your head covering, crowns Israel with glory, and you're ready to start moving, give strength to the weary. Those are the universal blessing we say no more. So turning back now to the beginning, the first blessing we already talked about, gives something, the ability to determine the difference between day and night. The Talmud, perhaps if I were doing the Talmud writing it, I would have written it differently. But the Talmud says that a man, and now it's clearly speaking to men, and often the Talmud is assuming most of the time that prayers and the prayer service is mostly going to be recited by men. Women did not necessarily recite all of the prayer service. There's a whole discussion of whether or not women traditionally understood required to pray or not. In today's modern world, in very Orthodox circles, the women are very careful to pray. Okay? They may not go to the synagogue to pray. That's the standard there. But that they pray. My daughter-in-law, bless her, she makes sure she gets all the 3 times a day prayers in. Okay. So, but the statement in the Talmud says that a person who has to recite these 3 negative statements, Shelo asani goy, Shelo asani ovid, Shelo asani isha, who did not make me a Gentile, who did not make me a slave, who did not make me a woman. Now, we have to put it in its context and see how we can understand it. The word goy, I think I mentioned this before, the word goy simply in its basic sense means a nation. Very clearly here, it's being used as goyei haratzot, the nations of the world, the other nations. And I know that Rav Soloveitchik, a blessed memory, who was an important modern Orthodox rabbi at Yeshiva University, he followed the tradition and didn't say goy, but he said nochri. Nochri means a stranger, somebody else. So, because goy doesn't, later on in the Siddur we have the word goy referring to Jews. Goy echad made us one goy, one nation. So he follows a tradition, but most traditional prayer books do not take that up. To use the word nochri. The second one is an eved. Now you have to understand, slavery was a reality in the ancient world. And in the Jewish world, there were actually 2 kinds of eved. One eved is an Eved Yisrael, which really was an indentured servant. A man, or sometimes occasionally a woman, would be sold into bondage for a period of 6 years. And their service was sold to their master. But they themselves were not sold in terms of they were not property. And they had pretty much the same full requirements as any other Jewish individual would have. Then there's what we today would call slaves. These were individuals who were not the Jewish, who didn't come from Israel, but from the other nations of the world. However it came about, which again, that was the ancient world, slavery existed. But by rabbinic times, at least, they understood that any slave that was purchased by a Jew had to undergo a partial conversion. Male slaves had to be circumcised. And they were required to follow all of the negative commandments, all the things you're not supposed to do. And some of the positive commandments, things that you were supposed to do. But they had the same level of requirements that the Jewish woman had. Because according to rabbinic tradition, negative commandments applied to everybody. Once you reach the age of adulthood, 12 for girls, 13 for boys, puberty, in other words. And when you're beginning to learn, you start, as a youngster, you start observing them. When you reach the age of puberty, of full adulthood, men were required to observe all the traditional 613 commandments of the Torah. Women, in general, were said to be exempt from those mitzvot that had to be performed at a certain time. They were governed by time elements. Okay? And so if it had to be done during the day and couldn't be done at night, that was a mitzvah that women were said to be exempt from. For example, putting on the tefillin, which are done during the day and not at night, women were said to be exempt from. Exempt means you don't have to do it. Doesn't mean you can't. The phylacteries is it? Yeah, we'll see that next week. I'll bring mine in and we'll talk about it in more detail. Okay. And then they get into differences of opinion about things like Kiddush on Friday night, Havdalah, Motzei Shabbat, all kinds of things, and then back and forth. And it's really a very difficult, really idea to discern what makes it a mitzvah that is time-bound or not. But in traditional Jewish circles still today, women are not obligated, are not considered to be obligated to do those mitzvot. So that understanding would say, then here we have 3 levels of mitzvot that we're talking about. There's a mitzvot of the non-Jew. The non-Jew is only required to observe the 7 mitzvot of the children of Noah. 7 basic rules of civilization, as the rabbi saw: not to murder, not to eat flesh from a living animal, not to commit sexual trespass, not to worship idols. Did I say murder? Mm-hmm. Steal, create a system of laws for society. Those are the 7 mitzvot that they know. Beyond that, a non-Jew was not required to do anything in our tradition. If you're not Jewish, you don't have to observe Shabbat. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're not Jewish, you don't have to keep kosher. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? It's an added mitzvah for the Jews. So you have the non-Jewish world, which is represented by Shelo Asani Goy or Shelo Asani Nochri. He gave me more to do. Why it's not in the positive, that's a problem for the apologetics, but that's where we're understanding it. Next comes the Gentile who became a slave to a Jewish owner, who was halfway to being Jewish. And they shared the same level of mitzvot as the Jewish woman did. The Jewish woman had higher status than the slave did, and so that's the three levels. Now, the conservative movement early 1940s, 50s, was bothered by this and decided to change the wording of these blessings so that in the conservative prayer books that are put out through the conservative movement, starts off by saying Shelo Sha'asani B'tzalmo, who made me in his image, in the divine image, which substitutes for Shelo Asani Isha, do not make me a woman. Sha'asani Ben Chorin, who made me a free person, which substitutes for the slave. Sha'asani Israel, who made me a Jew, substitutes Shelo Asani Goy. They put him in the positive. In the Orthodox world, you will not see that change because the Talmud says you have to say these three these ways. And so that's the way it appear in the traditional prayer books. Okay. Now, okay. I want us to turn over to the Shema. So let's go look at our table of contents again. And look for where it says, I'm sorry, we'll first look for it says Baruch Hu. 89. You're way back. Yeah, it's here a few times. The first time, it should on the first beginning. Everybody fine? Baruch Hu, page 89 in this one. Got it, Conrad? Yeah. Okay. Everybody else got it? Anybody not have it? You don't have it.
I'll see it. Hold on.
You may not have the full thing. All right. Baruch Hu is the summons to prayer. Okay. Our Islamic brothers have Muezzin who goes up into the minaret and calls out and summoning people to prayer. This, in a sense, is related to that same concept. When you have a minyan, which we have to talk about more later, present, you have somebody who is leading the service. And since we have a minyan present for this part of the service, they can call the summons to prayer, the Baruch Hu. Now that takes place in the morning service after the preliminary blessings and preliminary psalms that I skipped over. And it takes place in the evening service, at the beginning of the evening service. We talked about that a little bit when we talked about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. Okay? The Mincha service does not begin that way. Okay? So Baruch Hu is the Shliach Tzibur, the agent of the congregation, summons the congregation. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMivorach. Praise, bless the Lord who is to be blessed. As he translates the Lord, the Blessed One. Okay. So the congregation, the people listening, follow his command. Baruch Hu is a command. It's a tzivur. Bless God. So what do? They say, Baruch Hashem HaMivarach Le'olam Va'ed. They respond to the command to praise God, to bless God, or to acknowledge God as the source of blessing, which I think is really the best translation, and say that formula. Okay? Bless the Lord, the Blessed One, forever and all time. And then so that the Shliach Tzibur, the person who is leading the service, is not left out, the Shliach Tzibur says the same thing. So that's the summon to prayer. So that is the beginning of the passage where we will recite the Shema. Now, if you look after those few lines, you will see in the Hebrew it says Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam again. You all should be able to find that. Okay. Should be just after the where the leader recites in the same thing. Okay, so we have the introduction of a bracha, of a blessing, and this particular one, since this is the morning version of it, continues with Yotzer or Uvorei Choshech, Oseh Shalom Uvorei Hakol. He creates light, or forms light, and creates darkness, makes peace, and creates everything. Okay? Now, your Hebrew's not good enough for you to be able to read all that yet. Next week. It's interesting. This is a slight paraphrase of a verse, and the verse doesn't quite end the same way. The verse, I think I forget right now, I believe it's in Isaiah. It starts off the same way, who forms light and creates darkness, makes peace and creates evil. 45:5. 45:5. Okay. So we have there the same idea, but it's kind of hard to say, you're praising God and you might open your prayer service, you're going to say God creates evil. But if you say God creates everything, it includes evil. This is a statement that's very important to understand, that there is no separate God, no separate force that creates evil in the world, in the sense of creating. Borei means to really create, make out of nothing. People do evil. We don't create evil. Evil things happen in the world, and then tragedies happen in the world that have no moral value to them. An earthquake is not a moral evil. It's a tragedy for people who get hurt, but it's not a moral evil. People are capable of moral evils. But there is no Satan, no divinity competing with God. In contrast to Zoroastrianism, in which the rabbis of the Talmudic era lived with, Zoroastrians in the Babylonian Talmudic era, 3, 4, 5, 6 centuries, 7th century, coming up until the time of the Muslim conquest. Their theology was very much that. There was a God of good and there's a God of evil, God of light and God of dark. And so we have those elements mentioned here, light and dark, good and evil. The evil only being implied. But the source of all of those is the one God. So now,
That's hard to understand.
well,
If
that
God is, how can you be?
and that is one of the greatest challenges of all history. We don't say God is evil.
But he created it.
He creates that which we see as evil. I don't have a simple answer.
Give us choice.
Well, first of all, that's one of the traditional answers. If I have a train and I put it on the tracks, can't go anywhere but on the tracks. If I have an all-terrain car, it can go anywhere, right? Now, which is a more powerful image? The train on the tracks, even though it might be able to pull a lot more, or the ATV? ATV can go wherever it wants, do what it wants, has full freedom. It's not bound by the track. I can therefore hold the driver of that ATV responsible for wherever he drives or she drives. The conductor of the train, if he has an accident and falls off the track, all right. But if he's careful, can't do anything wrong.
Can I ask you a stupid question?
No, you can ask the question. There's no such thing as questions.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's a whole unit later on, but in short, the rabbis were bothered by it. If you look in the Bible, Ecclesiastes and Job, two important books of the Bible, challenge the normative position. If a simple reading, a straightforward reading of the Torah, and indeed probably most of the Bible, implies if you do good, you're rewarded in this world. If you do evil, you're punished in this world. We'll see that in the Shema in just a couple minutes. Okay.
What about the people that
Well,
don't do evil?
the big question. As a
Sir,
6-year-old dying of cancer, a person who's been very righteous and pious, and the tree falls on their head, or God forbid, the Hamas comes after them. The rabbis struggled with it. The book of Job struggles with it because Job seems to be a perfectly innocent man, and he suffers. And the reason he suffers is because God and Satan, and this is Satan, not Satan, Satan seem to have a bet with each other. And who's going to win the bet? So Job suffers, which I have on my own theology there behind it, which I think is suggesting that life is not always logical. But Ecclesiastes also says, look, you do everything, there's nothing new under the sun. You live, you die, you do good, and make a fortune, and you leave it to children who squander it. So there arise in Judaism a concept of reward and punishment, and I'm going to do it just brief now because we'll do it again when we talk about death and that. Either you're resurrected physically, good or rewarded, bad or punished, and or there is some kind of afterlife in which good are rewarded and evil are punished. And the more good that you do in this world, the greater your reward in the world to come. But everybody does some bad. So the greater you are in terms of your righteousness, the more you might suffer in this world. So you get the punishment out of the way. And when you go to the world to come, you don't have to worry about anything. And I'm putting in very
you've done your dues.
you earned it. You got the big chapel, big palace in the sky. These are very gross ways of describing all of it, and we'll talk in more depth later. But if you were a bad guy, who's so bad they don't do some good? You know, a kid's crying, they might give them a lollipop. Right? So whatever good they do in this world, they're rewarded for it in the here and now. So that in the world to come, all they got to look forward to is punishment. So that's an attempt to balance it out. Is it satisfactory? I don't say that it is or not. I don't know. I'm not completely happy with that.
Kabbalists think that
Well,
there's reincarnation.
Kabbalists do, they do believe in that concept of reincarnation. There's some references to that in Talmudic literature, but mainstream Judaism is not very big on the concept of reincarnation. But that does exist as well. But essentially, we're faced with the following. The issue is, if there is but one God, which Judaism stresses, there's only one deity. There are no actors in the universe that can overpower, overwhelm, attack the divine God. Then he has to be the author of everything. So we can either say we don't think it's evil, or we say that sometimes things happen and for whatever divine reason, he allows it to happen, which doesn't do a lot of good when we see some poor little child that got cancer or suffers and that sort of thing. And so there is no simple answer. Either you believe that there's one God who's in control of everything, or you believe that there's some things that are not in the hands of God, or God chooses to withdraw from it in some way, or you don't believe in God at all. One of my teachers, David Weiss, living in blessed memory, who went through the Holocaust, and he suggests, getting back to when we talk about free will, he uses a Kabbalistic idea, as a matter of fact, of Tzimtzum, which we talk about Kabbalah. But in essence, he says, God is in the world in some fashion. In the Bible, God is very much takes part actively in the history of the world. But in order to give people the opportunity, the ability to act on their own free will, and to really earn the right to say that I'm a good person, he withdraws, as it were. But as God withdraws, yeah, some people are going to do good, but that's going to open the door for people to do evil. And sometimes he gets so far from the world of that withdrawal that necessitates him coming back because things have gone awry. So that's his attempt to come to terms with the Holocaust.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah. But we will grapple with it more as the year goes on, I'm sure. But prayer is also a statement of theology. When we pray, we are saying what we believe, or hopefully we believe it, or we're struggling to believe it, or we're struggling with the belief. All of those are possible. Someone can read a prayer and say, I don't really believe it, but I'm going to say it every day because I'm going to struggle with it to try and find the answer to the problem. This is a story told in various ways, but I just heard the other day told about Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, said his father, who had learned in yeshiva, but then became a communist, which was not uncommon in the beginning of the 20th century. And then he was a communist, and he moved to Israel, and he wanted to make sure that his son learned Talmud. He says it's okay to be an atheist, or not because turn away. It's not okay to be an ignoramus. You can be an apikoros, but you can't be an amharis. Okay, so if you're struggling with it, then you're on the right track, whatever your answer may end up being. Okay, so when we say the Shema, we say God is the source of everything. What follows is in the morning service is a relatively long blessing, several pages. Until the blessing before the Shema, it's page 97 in this edition of the Koran. It does not begin with Baruch. That's the previous blessing ends with Baruch, but this does not. And then the next page is the Shema. So again, if you need to go to the table of contents, you'll look in the morning service, you will find it says the Shema, Kriyat Shema. Okay. By the way, that's a Nusach Sfard. You got it? Okay. So this is the Shema. It is found in Deuteronomy. I told you the story how the rabbis say that Jacob really said it the first time, or his children said it to Jacob the first time. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Listen here. Shema is a command again. Listen. Take note. Take heed. Shema is not just like, something idly you hear. You really have to pay attention. Israel, the Jewish people. Hashem, Yud Hey Vav Hey, that which we call Adonai in our prayers today. He is our God. Hu Eloheinu. We don't need to have who in Hebrew there. He is our God, not Zeus or the Greek or Jupiter, the Roman version, not Baal, not Thor, not Odin, not the latest Hollywood star. That is not our God. The ineffable, the one whose name we don't pronounce, the one that we cannot really describe, the one who has no real true image in the sense that we think of image, has no physical being, is above and beyond the physical realm altogether. That is God. And that is the only one, the sole one, the unique one, the unified one, the one in the absolute sense of one. Now, in the days of the temple, the response to a prayer was not like we say today, Amen. The response was Baruch Malchuto le'olam va'ed. In English, blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. That comes right afterwards. They have the word Shema, the line with the Shema, and then the next line. Because that's not written in the Torah, we don't say it out loud, except on, we don't say it aloud except on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we say it aloud. Because it really is not part of the Shema as was put in the Torah. Then follows 3 paragraphs. And this, when we say the Shema in the liturgy, these 3 paragraphs are always recited. You shall love, if you have to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. One interpretation, what does it mean with all your might? With all your property, all your possessions. Well, if you love God with your heart and your soul, what do you need to say with your possessions? Well, it's like the famous joke, Jack Benny, who most of you never heard of, who was his claim to fame. He was supposed to be a very skinflint, stingy man. And a robber, he was being held up at gunpoint. And the guy says, your money or your life? And Jack Benny says, your money or your life? Your money or your life? And Jack Benny says, I'm thinking. Okay. Some people, money is more important than their own lives. So anything, there are various ways of understanding. All right. You shall, these words which I command you today shall be on your heart. In other words, they got to penetrate into you. Teach them repeatedly. Vishinantam levanecha. The word teach here is the same root as the word to, which means repeat. How do you teach? By repeating it constantly. Teach your children repeatedly. Speaking of them when you sit at home and when you travel on the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. So the rabbis take this literally. When do we have to recite the Shema? When we lie down, which is when? At night. And when we get up, which is in the morning. That's why the Shema is recited part in the morning service and part of the evening service. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be an emblem between your eyes. That's the tefillin, the phylacteries. Next week. I have to just remember to bring mine. Write them on the doorposts of your house and gates. That's the mezuzah. We'll talk a little bit. The important part of the mezuzah, by the way, is not the outside case. It's what's inside. The prayer inside. That prayer inside is what we're reading right now. The first 2 paragraphs of the Shema.
But isn't that sort of a symbol also of when they were leaving?
No, you're talking about the blood on the doorpost.
Yeah, I always thought that's what.
Well, I don't say.
It
It is seen that way, And as a matter of fact, the tradition is that when you roll up the parchment, there's a word written on the back of the parchment, Shaddai, which means Almighty. But also it could be seen as abbreviation, Shomer Delatot Yisrael, the guardian of the doors of Israel. Maimonides says if you believe that it protects your home, you're a heretic. He says, don't think that. It's a commandment of God for that we put as a sign upon our home, not that it's a magical amulet. But some people treat it as an amulet. What can I tell you? All right, but in there, though, there are those. There's a tradition to kiss it. I don't think in this day and age one should be putting one hands on a thing when everybody else is putting their hands on. But putting it to your lips, it may not be such a sanitary thing to do. Wave at it. And we'll talk more about the mezuzah in more depth next week. Okay.
Rabbi
Okay.
Rubin,
Yes.
we have a question here on Zoom. Going back to the Hebrew stuff we spoke about earlier, in the Hebrew lesson we had, you talked about how in ancient Hebrew people think there weren't vowels and stuff. Where does the trope come from in the Torah?
Again, both the vowel system and the trope signs, which is how you telling you how to chant it. Okay. So, for example, the first line here, the first paragraph, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol me'odecha. Besides the vowel signs that are printed here, there are things that are called trope signs that tells you how to sing it. All right. Under V'ahavta is Menach Sakev Katan V'ahavta. Whatever it is, that's those symbols were created by the Masoretes anywhere between beginning in the 8th, 9th century, 10th century in Tiberias, and that's what we use today. There was actually another version of it which was a little bit different, but that didn't win the battle. And they also, I believe, were responsible for creating the trope signs. Okay, the musical notation. All right. So now let's go to the next paragraph of the Shema, which comes back to haunt us when we talk about the opening of of Baruch Hu. If you indeed heed my commandments, with which I charge you today, to love the Lord your God and worship him with all your heart and all your soul, I will give rain in your land in the season, the early and late rain. But this is all a harbinger back to the fact that they're talking about the land of Israel, in which this is the weather pattern that's important to understand. Okay? You shall gather in your grain, wine, and oil. I will give grass in your field for your cattle, and you shall eat and be satisfied. All right. So if you do right, well, everything will go well. In agricultural society, this is what you need. You need rain for the crops. You need feed for your cattle, your sheep, and your goats, all those good things. Be careful lest your heart be tempted and you go astray and worship other gods, bowing down to them. Okay, if you do this, then the Lord's anger will flare against you, and he will close the heavens so there will be no rain. The land will not yield its crops, and you will perish swiftly from the good land that the Lord is giving you. Okay, so he says, do good, you get good. Do bad, you get bad. Therefore, since I told you what the choices are, do good to get good, do bad, you get bad. Therefore, set these my words on your heart and soul, bind them again, a sign on your hand, and there should be an emblem between your eyes. Teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit at home, when you travel on the way, when you lie down, when you rise. Write them on the doorposts of your house and gates, so that you and your children may live long in the land the Lord swore to your ancestors to give them for as long as heavens are above the earth. So what is called by modern scholars the Deuteronomic theology, because these two paragraphs that we just read are found in the book of Deuteronomy, imply, at least on the straightforward surface level, reward comes in this world, punishment comes in this world. There's no talk about afterlife. There's no talk about reward, heavenly recompense, anything like that here. That we find in rabbinic writings. The last paragraph, and we'll finish with that. All right. The last paragraph of the Shema says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Israelites and tell them to make tassels, tzitzit, on the corners of their garments for all generations. They shall attach to the tzitzit, the tassel, each corner a thread of blue. This shall be your tassel, and you shall keep it and remember all the Lord's commandments, and keep them not straying after your heart and after your eyes, following your own sinful desires. Thus you will be reminded to keep all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. And then traditionally, the end of that paragraph is, I am the Lord your God, but you say the first word of the next paragraph immediately, emet, true. And when the person who's conducting the service, Shliach Tzibur, finishes, the Shliach Tzibur says those out loud, Ani Hashem Elohechem emet. Okay? So this is where the mitzvah of the tzitzit comes from. This is where it talks about the blue thread in the tzitzit, and all of that we'll talk about more next week. Okay? Any questions on what we've done so far tonight? Anybody out there in Neverland? All right. So we will continue next week. I say the following, if those who would like, who have a talit, if they want to bring a talit and see how to put it on correctly, male or female, I'm going to do. We'll talk about women in tefillin and tzitzit next week as well, and mezuzah, and more about the siddur. Okay. Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you.